Welcome to our channel. Before we begin, take a moment to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the gripping stories we're about to share. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to keep creating even more powerful content. Are you ready? Let's step into a horrifying story, a case that shook America where darkness hides beneath the most ordinary disguise, and every death is a piece of an unprecedented nightmare. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the pristine hallways of the St. Jude Medical Center was a constant, almost soothing presence. It was 2 a.m., and a skeletal crew of night nurses and a handful of dedicated doctors moved with practiced quietness, their footsteps muffled by the gleaming linoleum. Outside, a gentle autumn rain was falling, painting the city in a melancholic sheen. Inside, a different kind of chill was beginning to seep into the air, one that had nothing to do with the weather. Elijah Eli Thorne, 42, was a creature of habit. For 17 years, he had been the backbone of the night shift custodial staff at St. Jude. His presence was so unremarkable, so woven into the fabric of the hospital's nocturnal rhythm, that most employees barely registered him. He was the ghost in the machine, the silent worker who ensured that when the morning sun streamed through the windows, the hospital would be spotless, a testament to order and hygiene. His uniform, a crisp blue jumpsuit, always seemed freshly pressed. His mop bucket gleamed, and his stack of cleaning cloths was impeccably folded. His face, often obscured by the brim of his cap, was generally nondescript, a lean jaw, tired eyes, and a thin, almost invisible scar just above his left eyebrow. He spoke little, offered no opinions, and executed his tasks with a methodical efficiency that bordered on the robotic. To many, Eli was the epitome of the good worker, reliable, uncomplaining, and utterly invisible. But beneath that veneer of mundane normalcy, a tempest brewed. It had been brewing for years, a slow-burn resentment, a festering wound of perceived slights and unacknowledged worth. Eli saw the doctors, the gods in white coats, gliding through the halls, lauded, respected, their every word treated as gospel. He saw the nurses, buzzing with purpose, their smiles bright, their compassion seemingly endless. And then there was him, the man who cleaned up their messes, the silent witness to their triumphs and their failures, the one who literally wiped away the evidence of human frailty, yet remained an afterthought, a shadow. He was the one who saw the discarded dreams in the waste bins, the forgotten aspirations in the soiled linens, the quiet desperation in the corners of patients' rooms after visiting hours. He was the keeper of secrets, not by choice, but by proximity. And in that silent observation, a dark seed had taken root. The first incident, if one could even call it that, had been subtle, almost imperceptible. A misplaced chart, a forgotten medicine trolley in an obscure corridor. Small, easily explainable oversights in the chaotic ecosystem of a hospital. But then, things began to escalate. It started in room 307. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, an 86-year-old woman recovering from hip surgery, had been found unresponsive in her bed. The night nurse, Sarah Jenkins, had attributed it to her age and a pre-existing heart condition. The autopsy confirmed a cardiac arrest. No foul play suspected. Eli had been the one to clean room 307 that night, meticulously wiping down every surface, his movements precise, almost reverent. As he pushed his cart down the hallway, the faint scent of lilies, Mrs. Vance's favorite flower, seemed to cling to him. 2 weeks later, Mr. Thomas Albright, a relatively healthy 50-year-old suffering from a severe case of pneumonia, was found dead in room 412. The cause of death was officially listed as respiratory failure, a complication of his pneumonia. But Dr. Evelyn Reed, the attending physician, had a nagging feeling. Mr. Albright had been responding well to treatment. His breathing had improved significantly just hours before. She chalked it up to the unpredictable nature of the disease, but a prickle of unease remained. Again, Eli had been the one to clean the room. He had even offered a quiet, almost sympathetic nod to the distraught family members in the waiting area, a gesture so uncharacteristic that it went largely unnoticed in their grief. The pattern, if it could be called that, was still too faint to be recognized. The victims were all elderly or seriously ill, their deaths easily attributable to natural causes or existing medical conditions. Eli continued his rounds, a phantom figure in the pre-dawn hours, his mop bucket sloshing rhythmically, the squeak of his cart wheels a familiar symphony in the quiet corridors. But then came the night of the great St. Jude power surge. It was a Friday, one of those unusually humid summer nights in late July. A sudden, violent thunderstorm had ripped through the city, causing a localized power outage that plunged the lower floors of St. Jude into momentary darkness. The backup generators kicked in almost immediately, but for a critical few minutes, there was a disorienting hush, a collective intake of breath from staff and patients alike. It was during this brief window of chaos that the third death occurred. Mr. Robert Maxwell, a seemingly healthy man in his late 60s, admitted for a routine hernia repair, was found dead in his bed in room 204. This time, the circumstances were different. Mr. Maxwell had no pre-existing conditions that could explain a sudden death. His surgery had been successful, and he was due to be discharged the following morning. The initial autopsy was inconclusive, but the toxicology report, which came back a week later, sent a jolt through the medical community. Traces of a highly potent, fast-acting sedative, not prescribed to Mr. Maxwell, were found in his system. The amount was small, almost homeopathic, but enough to depress his respiratory system in his sleep, especially when combined with the general sedative effects of postoperative medication. Panic began to ripple through St. Jude. A rogue nurse was the immediate, terrifying whisper. Security was heightened. Staff members were asked to account for their movements. Lockers were searched, but no clear culprit emerged. The sedative was common, found in various forms throughout the hospital. Its presence in Mr. Maxwell's system could have been an accidental cross-contamination, a mistake, or something far more sinister. Eli Thorne, during the power surge, had been on the second floor, emptying biohazard bins. When the lights flickered back on, he was observed calmly pushing his cart. His face unreadable, his movements unhurried. He had even helped a panicked nurse reset a fallen four-pole, his hands surprisingly steady. He was just doing his job, a diligent cog in the grand machinery of the hospital. Detective Sergeant Mark O'Connell was assigned to the case. O'Connell was a veteran detective, jaded but sharp, with a reputation for seeing beyond the obvious. He had a meticulous mind and an uncanny ability to connect disparate pieces of information. The St. Jude case, however, was proving to be a frustrating enigma. There was no forced entry, no obvious signs of struggle. The deaths were occurring within the hospital's secure environment. It screamed inside job, but the motive, the method, and the perpetrator remained stubbornly elusive. O'Connell started with the basics: timelines, access logs, staff rosters. He interviewed every staff member who had been on duty during the time of Mr. Maxwell's death. The nurses were exhausted, stressed, and defensive. The doctors were tight-lipped, their professional composure strained by the growing fear that a killer might be operating under their very noses. Eli Thorne was interviewed as part of the routine. He answered O'Connell's questions with polite brevity, his gaze steady but distant. He described his routine with monotonous detail: mopping, emptying trash, restocking supplies. He confirmed his presence on the second floor during the power surge, corroborating the testimony of a junior nurse who remembered seeing him near the nurses' station shortly after the lights came back on. O'Connell found nothing suspicious about him. Eli Thorne was, by all accounts, a model employee. Too model, perhaps, O'Connell mused, making a mental note that sometimes the most unremarkable people were the most dangerous. But he had no evidence, only a vague, unsettling feeling. The hospital administration, desperate to maintain public trust, assured the media that it was an isolated incident, an unfortunate anomaly. But internally, a palpable fear was growing. Nurses started checking on their patients more frequently. Doctors double-checked medications. The once soothing hum of the fluorescent lights now seemed to carry a faint, almost imperceptible buzz of anxiety. Eli, meanwhile, continued his duties. He noticed the heightened vigilance, the suspicious glances, the way conversations would abruptly cease when he entered a room. He registered it all, tucked it away, a quiet satisfaction blossoming in the dark corners of his mind. They were finally paying attention. They were finally seeing him, not as the cleaner, the invisible hand, but as a presence, a force, even if they didn't yet know it was him. The game had begun, and he, Eli Thorne, the silent custodian, was holding all the cards. The pristine halls of St. Jude, once a sanctuary of healing, were slowly, subtly, becoming a meticulously maintained stage for his unfolding grand design. The isolated incident quickly spiraled into a chilling, undeniable pattern. 3 more deaths occurred at St. Jude in the following month, each mirroring the unnerving characteristics of Mr. Maxwell's demise. Mrs. Helen Peterson, 78, recovering from pneumonia, died of an unexplained respiratory arrest. Mr. Samuel Goldberg, 65, undergoing physical therapy after knee surgery, suffered a fatal cardiac event. And most disturbingly, Miss Emily Chun, a vibrant 24-year-old interning as a medical student, was found dead in the staff lounge, her morning coffee mug still warm beside her. The toxicology reports for all 3 revealed the same subtle, lethal cocktail of unprescribed sedatives and, in Emily's case, a fast-acting muscle relaxant that left no trace in the blood within hours, but paralyzed the respiratory system. Panic exploded. The media descended upon St. Jude, its gleaming facade now overshadowed by the grim specter of a serial killer. The St. Jude Strangler, the hospital killer, the angel of death, the headline screamed, each more sensational than the last. The hospital, once a beacon of healing, became a fortress under siege, its doors guarded, its staff under intense scrutiny. Patients were being transferred out in droves, and new admissions had plummeted. Detective Sergeant Mark O'Connell, now working round the clock, felt the immense pressure bearing down on him. His team was expanding, forensic specialists combing every inch of the hospital, security footage meticulously reviewed, and every single employee, from the CEO down to the cafeteria staff, undergoing repeated interviews and background checks. The profile of the killer began to solidify. An insider, someone with unrestricted access to the hospital's various areas, someone who could administer lethal substances without raising immediate suspicion. The lack of forced entry, the precise targeting of vulnerable individuals, and the use of easily camouflaged substances all pointed to an intelligent, methodical perpetrator. Eli Thorne was re-interviewed, this time with more intensity. O'Connell had been keeping a quiet eye on him since their first meeting, a tiny, almost irrational instinct gnawing at him. He found Eli's consistent calm unnerving, his almost photographic memory of his cleaning routes bordering on obsessive. But still, nothing concrete emerged. Eli's alibis for each death, though circumstantial, generally held up, supported by the testimony of other night staff who recalled seeing him in different parts of the hospital, engaged in his duties. He was always just out of reach, a blur at the edge of the frame in security footage, or a fleeting presence described by a passing nurse. Mr. Thorne, O'Connell had pressed during one interview, his eyes fixed on Eli's. You work the night shift. You see a lot. Have you noticed anything at all out of the ordinary? Any new faces? Anyone acting strangely? Eli had paused, his gaze drifting to the window, where the city lights twinkled like distant, uncaring stars. Detective, he'd said, his voice flat. At night, everyone is a ghost. The sick, the dying, the ones who watch over them. We all move in shadows. What's ordinary in a place where life and death are a constant dance? He had then offered a faint, almost imperceptible shrug. I just clean. I clean the dirt. The rest is above my pay grade. The response, while seemingly innocuous, resonated with a strange, dark poetry that disturbed O'Connell. It hinted at an observation that went beyond mere cleaning, a philosophical detachment that was unsettling. Meanwhile, the forensic team made a breakthrough. In Miss Emily Chen's staff lounge, hidden in a rarely used utility closet adjacent to the lounge, they discovered a small, almost microscopic residue of a cleaning agent, specifically a highly concentrated industrial floor wax, that was unique to St. Jude's night shift custodial supplies. It was an odd finding, Why would a medical student's death be connected to a specific cleaning product? The only person who regularly handled that particular wax was Eli Thorne. This discovery, while not a smoking gun, finally shifted O'Connell's focus. He began to look at Eli Thorne not just as an employee, but as a potential suspect. He delved deeper into Eli's past. It was sparse, almost blank. Orphaned young, he had been raised in a series of foster homes, then a brief stint in the army, honorably discharged after a non-combat injury. No criminal record, no known associates, no family. Eli Thorne was, on paper, a perfectly unremarkable man. And that, O'Connell realized, was precisely what made him so terrifying. O'Connell decided on a subtle, high-stakes surveillance. Under the guise of increasing security for all staff, a new, advanced surveillance system was installed throughout the hospital, including tiny, almost invisible cameras in key areas previously unmonitored: utility closets, break rooms, and obscure corridors often frequented by the custodial staff. The cameras were designed to capture even the slightest anomaly, sound-activated, and capable of high-definition imagery in low light. For 2 agonizing weeks, O'Connell's team watched. They watched Eli Thorne meticulously clean, his movements precise, his face impassive. They saw him empty bins, buff floors, polish fixtures. He was the embodiment of efficiency, a tireless machine. Then, on a Tuesday night, something shifted. It was 3:15 a.m. Eli was on the 5th floor, the oncology ward, known for its hushed intensity. Nurse Megan Riley, a young, compassionate woman known for her late-night checks, was making her rounds. She paused at room 503, the room of Mr. Arthur Finch, a terminally ill patient in his final stages. Mr. Finch was barely conscious, kept comfortable by a continuous 4-drip of palliative care medication. The surveillance camera in the hallway, trained on the nurse's station, showed Eli pushing his cart slowly past room 503. He paused, almost imperceptibly, his head tilted. Nurse Riley then entered room 503. A minute later, Eli continued down the hall, turning into a utility closet that had one of the new, hidden cameras. Inside, the camera captured him reaching into a small, zippered pouch in his mop bucket. He pulled out a slender, almost needle-like instrument, its tip glinting faintly under the weak utility light. He then carefully, expertly, attached a tiny, pre-filled syringe to it. His face, for the first time, showed a flicker of something beyond disinterest, a focused intensity, a cold resolve. He then secreted the instrument back into his pouch. Minutes later, Eli emerged from the closet, his face once again a mask of placid indifference. He continued his cleaning route, but O'Connell and his team knew. They had him. The isolated incident of the floor wax residue was now chillingly clear. He was using the utility closets, the very spaces he was entrusted to maintain, as his covert staging grounds. The team moved quickly but discreetly. Nurse Riley was called away from room 503 under a fabricated emergency. A rapid response team entered the room. Mr. Finch was still alive, his breathing shallow, but something was different. A tiny, almost invisible puncture mark was found on his foreline, just above the drip chamber. A sample from the forebag was immediately taken. The preliminary analysis, performed on-site by a rapid test kit, confirmed the presence of a potent muscle relaxant, the same one found in Emily Chen's system, a substance known to quickly dissipate, making it hard to detect in a full autopsy. The evidence was overwhelming. The surveillance footage, the specialized cleaning agent, the new puncture mark, and the rapid response test. Eli Thorne, the invisible custodian, was the St. Jude killer. The arrest was carried out with surgical precision. As Eli pushed his mop cart towards the exit at the end of his shift, 2 plainclothes detectives approached him, their badges glinting. Eli offered no resistance. He simply stopped, put down his mop, and looked at O'Connell, who had walked up behind the arresting officers. There was no surprise in Eli's eyes, no fear, only a strange, almost serene acceptance. "It's over, Eli," O'Connell said, his voice flat, the relief palpable yet tinged with a profound sadness. Eli simply nodded. "Is it, detective?" he murmured, his voice soft, almost a whisper. Or is it just beginning? The words sent a shiver down O'Connell's spine. What could Eli possibly mean? As Eli was led away, his hands cuffed behind his back, he cast one last glance back at the pristine, silent halls of St. Jude, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to swell, a final, chilling symphony for the end of his reign of terror, and the beginning of a far more disturbing revelation. The interrogation room was stark, sterile, and cold, a fitting backdrop for the chilling narrative that was about to unfold. Detective Sergeant Mark O'Connell sat opposite Eli Thorne, the metal table between them a silent barrier. Eli, stripped of his blue uniform and now in an orange jumpsuit, looked even more unassuming, almost frail. But his eyes, O'Connell had learned, held a disturbing depth, a quiet fire that belied his outwardly docile demeanor. Eli, O'Connell began, his voice calm, measured. We have the evidence. The surveillance footage, the forensics, the testimony. It's over. We know you did it. Eli stared at the chipped paint on the wall, his face devoid of emotion. Did what, detective? He asked, his voice still that soft, almost ethereal whisper. Cleaned? Maintained order. O'Connell leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. You murdered 8 people, Eli. Mrs. Vance, Mr. Albright, Mr. Maxwell, Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Goldberg, Miss Chun, and almost Mr. Finch. Why Eli? Why them? Why St. Jude? A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the hum of the ventilation system. Then Eli slowly turned his head, his eyes meeting O'Connell's. A flicker, an almost imperceptible spark of something triumph, madness, danced within them. They were all blind, Eli finally said, his voice gaining a faint, unsettling resonance. Blind to the real work, blind to the suffering, blind to me. O'Connell pressed him. Blind to what, Eli? Explain. Eli took a deep breath, and then the story began to pour out, a torrent of long-suppressed resentment and a chillingly warped sense of justice. For 17 years, Eli began, his voice now steady, almost lecturing. I walked those halls. I saw it all. The arrogant doctors preening in their knowledge. The self-righteous nurses dispensing their care. And beneath it all, the filth. The true filth. Not just the physical grime I cleaned, but the moral decay. The neglect. The quiet suffering that went unacknowledged. He spoke of the countless times he saw patients ignored, their pleas dismissed as senility or overreaction. He described observing overworked nurses making careless mistakes, doctors rushing through rounds, their humanity eroded by exhaustion and caseloads. But more than anything, he spoke of invisibility. I was the ghost, Eli continued, his eyes now fixed on O'Connell's. The one who literally cleaned up their messes. I saw the discarded hopes in the trash, the silent tears dried on discarded tissues. I heard the desperate whispers when no one else was listening. I was there, in the background, a silent witness to their hubris and their neglect. But did anyone ever see me? Acknowledge me? Offer a word of thanks beyond a perfunctory good morning? No, I was the janitor, the cleaner, the dust under their feet. His voice grew colder, infused with a simmering rage. They built their careers on the suffering of others, yet they treated the very environment of healing with such casual disregard. They were too busy being gods to notice the cracks in their own kingdom. And I was the one who saw the cracks. I was the one who felt the cracks. He revealed his meticulously planned method. The initial deaths, Mrs. Vance and Mr. Albright, were experiments. He had subtly tampered with their medication, just enough to push them over the edge, knowing their pre-existing conditions would provide a convenient cover. He had used readily available hospital-grade sedatives, learning their effects, their half-lives, their subtle applications. He had studied toxicology reports, understanding how to leave minimal traces. Mr. Maxwell's death was his first intentional statement. He was healthy, Eli stated almost proudly. A man who didn't fit their narrative of natural causes. That's when they started to look. That's when they started to feel the fear. They were finally noticing something was wrong, something beyond their control. Emily Chen's death, Eli explained, was a turning point for him, a statement to the medical establishment itself. She was one of them, he sneered, a future god in a white coat. She would have learned their ways, perpetuated their blindness. I stopped her before she could become another part of the problem. I used the muscle relaxant on her. It's fast, undetectable. Clean, efficient exit. Just like I cleaned the halls. He detailed how he exploited the hospital's routines, its blind spots. The utility closets, the seldom-used corridors, the brief moments of chaos like the power surge, these were his opportunities. He had developed a specialized, almost invisible needle, thin enough to pierce 4 lines without leaving obvious marks, small enough to conceal in his mop bucket. He understood the timing, the vulnerabilities, the subtle shifts in the hospital's rhythm that no one else paid attention to. I wasn't just cleaning their floors, detective, Eli concluded, his voice rising slightly, a strange, triumphant lilt in his tone. I was cleaning their conscience. I was purging the system. They ignored me, they dismissed me, they walked over me. Now they would remember me. They would know that the unseen hand could also be the hand of judgment. O'Connell listened, a chilling dread settling in his stomach. This wasn't just a killer driven by revenge. It was a killer driven by an intensely personal, warped ideology, born from years of perceived indignity and psychological decay. Eli Thorne wasn't just seeking to kill. He was seeking to be seen, to be acknowledged, to force the world to finally look at the man they had consistently overlooked. And Mr. Finch? O'Connell asked, the last victim, the one they had managed to save. Eli offered a faint smile, a truly disturbing sight. A final flourish, detective. A warning. Even as you caught me, I showed you how easily it could still be done. How vulnerable they truly are, even in their secure environment. The interrogation continued for hours, Eli meticulously recounting each murder, each subtle manipulation, each chilling detail. He spoke of his victims with a detached clinicality, as if they were merely pieces on a chessboard, pawns in his grand statement. There was no remorse, no regret, only a profound sense of self-justification. He saw himself not as a monster, but as a reluctant executioner, forced into action by the blindness and indifference of a system that had rendered him invisible. The St. Jude case, now fully unraveled, sent shockwaves not just through America, but internationally. The image of the silent, unassuming custodian, the bedrock of any institution, turning into a meticulous serial killer, became a horrifying symbol of the hidden dangers that lurk in the most mundane corners of society. It sparked debates on mental health, workplace dynamics, and the often overlooked dignity of invisible labor. Eli Thorne was tried, convicted, and sentenced to multiple life terms without parole. He remained impassive throughout the trial, his quiet demeanor unchanged. But in the hushed corridors of the courthouse, and in the collective memory of a horrified nation, his whisper resonated. They were blind to me. The St. Jude Medical Center underwent a complete overhaul, its security measures drastically enhanced, its staff undergoing mandatory psychological evaluations, and a renewed emphasis placed on the well-being and recognition of all employees, from the highest-ranking surgeon to the lowest-paid cleaner. The pristine halls of St. Jude would forever carry the shadow of Eli Thorne, a haunting reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats are the ones you never see coming, the ones who silently clean up your messes, all while watching, waiting, and plotting their own terrible form of justice. The story of the invisible cleaner, the St. Jude killer, became a modern urban legend, a chilling cautionary tale that forced society to confront its own blind spots and to acknowledge that even in the brightest, most sterile environments, the darkest of human motivations can fester, silently, until they erupt in a storm of unimaginable horror. Thank you for following this horrifying story with us. We hope it has given you moments of suspense and reflection. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the thrilling and chilling stories we'll bring you in the future. See you in the next episodes.